When Jessica grabbed that basket full of freshly baked breads, when she lifted it in front of the hungry eyes of that 6-year-old girl, when she dumped it completely into the trash can and sprayed cleaning product on top so nobody could rescue them, she thought she had won. She thought she had made it clear who was in charge at that upscale bakery. She thought that old man in worn clothes and that barefoot girl would never again bother her important customers. But what Jessica didn't know, what she never imagined as she smiled with contempt, is that the elegant lady sitting at the corner table, that woman who had watched everything in silence while drinking her coffee, wasn't just any customer, and what was about to happen would turn that day of humiliation into the worst mistake of her life. Because sometimes justice comes when you least expect it, and sometimes the person you think has no power has all the power. This is the story of a piece of bread, and how an act of cruelty in front of the wrong person can change everything in a second. The afternoon sun was beginning to hide behind the tall buildings of downtown, painting the sky a tired orange that seemed to say goodbye to another day. Shadows stretched across the clean sidewalks where people walked quickly, always in a hurry, always with some important place to be. In this part of the city, everything gleamed. Store windows reflected perfect lights. The parked cars were brand new, shining without a speck of dust. The people entering and leaving the shops wore expensive clothes, carried bags from recognized brands, talked on the latest smartphones. It was the kind of neighborhood where poverty wasn't allowed, where misery was invisible because nobody wanted to see it. And right in the middle of all that perfection, on the busiest corner, stood the bakery, Golden Delight. Its name shone in golden letters above the glass entrance. Inside, warm lights illuminated display cases full of artisan breads, cakes decorated like works of art, imported cookies, European chocolates. The smell of freshly melted butter and caramelized sugar floated out the door every time someone entered or left. It was the kind of place where a coffee cost what many families spent on food for an entire day. And at that afternoon hour, as the sun began to set, the bakery was still full. Elegant women with expensive sunglasses conversed while seated at the small tables in the back. Men in suits checked their laptops while drinking double espressos. Young people took photos of their desserts to post on social media. Nobody paid attention to what was happening outside. Nobody except one woman. Mrs. Helen was 55 years old, but time had treated her with elegance. Her brown hair was perfectly styled in a low bun. She wore a cream-colored tailored suit that looked understated but expensive. Her hands, without flashy rings, held a white porcelain cup with still hot coffee. She was seated at the corner table, the farthest from the commotion, next to the large window facing the street. From there she could see everything, and at that moment what she was seeing was silently breaking her heart, because on the other side of the glass, standing on the corner of the sidewalk, was an elderly man. His name was George. Mr. George to those who knew him at the shelter where he slept some nights, but to most people who passed him without looking, he had no name. He was just another lump on the street, a shadow that didn't deserve attention. He was 70 years old, though his hunched body and face furrowed with deep wrinkles made him look much older. His clothes were clean, that much was true. He made the effort to wash them whenever he could at the public fountain in the park. But the blue shirt he wore was so worn that it was see-through in some places. The brown pants had patches upon patches. The shoes, which were once black, now showed the cardboard he had put inside to cover the holes in the soles. In his right hand, trembling from the years and hunger, he held an empty plastic bag. And in his left hand, he held something much more valuable than any treasure in the world. He held his granddaughter's tiny hand. Emma had just turned 6 years old. Her round little face was dirty. She had a dirt stain on her left cheek, and her tangled dark hair fell over her thin shoulders. She wore a pink dress that was too big for her, probably donated, with a hole in the hem. But what stood out most about Emma were her eyes. They were big, too big for her thin little face, and they shone with that kind of innocence that the world hadn't yet managed to completely break, though it had tried hard. At that moment, as she stood next to her grandfather on that corner, Emma had one hand on her little belly. and her little belly was making noises. Loud noises. The kind that hurt. The kind that warn that no food has entered in many hours. Mr. George looked down at his granddaughter and felt his chest tighten so much he could barely breathe. Emma looked up at him. Her big eyes held that question children ask without words. "Grandpa, are we going to eat today?" The old man swallowed hard. He gently squeezed his granddaughter's little hand, as if saying, "Hold on a little longer, my love," and then looked toward the Golden Delight Bakery. He knew what he had to do. He had done it before in other places. He always waited until late afternoon, when bakeries had to decide what to do with yesterday's bread. Bread they could no longer sell at full price, bread that in many cases would end up in the trash anyway. He took a deep breath. The cold afternoon air filled his lungs and gave him a little courage. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered in a raspy voice. "Let's ask politely. If we're polite, people have good hearts." Emma nodded. She trusted her grandfather more than anyone in the world. Together, holding hands, they crossed the street. Mr. George's heart was beating hard. Each step was difficult, not because of his tired body, but because of the shame he felt. The shame of having to beg. The shame that his granddaughter, his treasure, had to see her grandfather humiliate himself in front of strangers. But a grandfather's love is stronger than shame, and a little girl's hunger is more important than a man's pride. They reached the glass door of the bakery. Mr. George pushed gently. The door opened with a little bell tinkle announcing the entrance of customers, and when they entered, everything changed. The warm, perfumed air inside hit them like a slap. The contrast was brutal. Outside, the cold of the street. Inside, the heat of the oven and the smell of melted butter. Some people turned to look at them, and faces changed. A woman choosing a cake frowned. A man in a suit stepped back, as if poverty were contagious. A young woman put her purse on her lap, protectively, and pressed her lips together. Mr. George felt all those looks like needles piercing his skin. But he kept walking. Slowly, with his head slightly bowed, with Emma pressed against his leg. He walked to the counter. Behind the counter were 3 employees. 2 of them, young women with impeccable white aprons, were busy packing orders and serving coffees. They moved quickly, efficiently, without looking at Mr. George. But the one who did look at him was the 3rd woman, Jessica, the manager. She was 30 years old and felt like she owned the world. Her uniform was different from the others, a fitted black suit with the bakery's golden logo embroidered on the chest. Her blonde hair, dyed on purpose to look more international, was pulled back in a high, tight ponytail. Her nails, perfectly manicured, were painted blood red, and on her face, at that moment, was an expression Mr. George knew very well: contempt. Jessica looked him up and down. Her eyes stopped at the old man's broken shoes. Then they moved up to the empty plastic bag he was holding. Then to the dirty girl clinging to his leg. And then Jessica did something that chilled the blood. She smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile, it was a cold smile, a smile that said, "I know exactly what you came to ask for, and I've already decided the answer is no." Mr. George waited. He had learned, with years on the street, that he shouldn't speak first, that he shouldn't interrupt, that he should wait to be given permission to open his mouth, because that's how the world worked when you were poor. You had to ask permission even to exist. Jessica finished writing something in a notebook. She took her time, a lot of time, more than necessary. She did it on purpose to make him wait, to remind him who had control. Finally, without looking up, she asked in a bored voice, "What do you want?" Mr. George swallowed hard. His throat was dry. "Good afternoon, miss," he said in a soft voice, almost a whisper. "Excuse me for bothering you." Jessica raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Mr. George continued, I wanted to know if you have any bread from yesterday. Something you're not going to sell anymore, something that—" His voice broke a little. "Something you were going to throw away." Silence. The 2 young employees stopped moving. They exchanged glances. Some customers turned to watch. Jessica put the notebook on the counter. She crossed her arms over her chest, and she looked directly into Mr. George's eyes. Yesterday's bread, she repeated, dragging out the words. Yes, miss, just a little piece. For my granddaughter. She hasn't eaten since yesterday. And as if to prove her grandfather right, Emma's little belly made a loud noise at that moment, a long growl that was heard in all the silence of the bakery. The girl turned red. She lowered her little head, embarrassed. Mr. George felt his heart break into pieces. Please, he added, and his voice sounded so tired, so broken. It's not for me. It's for her. She's very small. She's hungry. Jessica stared at him. Then she looked at the girl, and then she did something nobody expected. She laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, it was a low laugh, almost a snort. But it was enough to make Mr. George feel like the earth was opening beneath his feet. Do you know how many people like you come here asking for leftovers? Jessica said, making air quotes with her fingers when she said the word leftovers. If I give to one, tomorrow I'll have a line of beggars at my door. And that scares away my real customers. She emphasized the word real, as if Mr. George and Emma were ghosts, unreal things. Mr. George felt his cheeks burn. Miss, I understand, but... Besides, Jessica interrupted him, we don't give anything away here. This is a business, not a charity. If you want bread, buy it. Mr. George nodded quickly. There was his chance. Yes, miss. I have money. I have money to pay. He put his trembling hand in his pants pocket. He pulled out something wrapped in an old handkerchief. He opened it carefully. Inside were coins, pennies, nickels, dimes. Some were tarnished, others so worn you could barely see the number. Mr. George placed them on the counter carefully as if they were treasures. He counted in a low voice. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 cents. He looked up at Jessica, with hope shining in his tired eyes. Is this enough for something, miss? For a small bread? For a broken cookie? Jessica looked at the coins on the counter, and the contempt on her face multiplied. 50 cents? She said, and this time she didn't laugh. This time her voice came out full of disgust. Are you offering me 50 cents? Mr. George didn't know what to say. Our cheapest bread costs $5, Jessica continued, pointing to the price sign on the wall. $5. You have 50 cents. What do you want me to do with that? Wrap up the smell of bread for you? Some people in the bakery let out stifled giggles. Mr. George felt tears stinging his eyes, but he held them back. He couldn't cry. Not in front of his granddaughter. He had to be strong. Miss, please. His voice was now barely a thread. You have so many breads back there. I see the baskets full. Some are already from yesterday, right? I saw them from outside. Those you're going to throw in the trash when you close. Jessica narrowed her eyes. Were you spying on me? No, miss, I was just passing by, and I saw that what I do with my bread is my business, Jessica cut him off. And if I decide to throw it all in the trash instead of giving it to people like you, that's my decision. This is my business. Technically, it wasn't her business. She was the manager, not the owner. But she spoke as if she owned the entire world. Mr. George felt something break inside him. Please, he repeated, and now his voice did tremble. My granddaughter. Emma, who had been quiet all this time, lifted her little face, and with her little 6-year-old voice, she said something that broke the soul of everyone who had one. Grandpa's right, ma'am. I'm very hungry. My tummy hurts. And then, without anyone asking her, without anyone telling her, Emma put her little hands together in front of her, as if she were praying, and with her big eyes full of tears she begged, Please, pretty lady, just a little piece of bread. I promise to be good. I promise not to make a mess. Please. There was silence. A silence so deep you could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. Everyone in the bakery watched the scene. One of the young employees brought her hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. She was about to say something, to offer to take bread from her own pocket to give to the girl. But Jessica looked at her with fury, a look that said, Don't you dare. And then Jessica did something that nobody would ever forget. She turned around. She walked to the back of the bakery, where the baskets with yesterday's bread were. Everyone thought she was going to give in, that she was going to have mercy, that she would give at least one little bread to that hungry girl. Jessica grabbed a full basket. It was loaded with breads. Round breads, rolls, sweet buns, donuts. Bread that, yes, was already a day old, but was still perfectly edible. Bread that in 2 more hours would end up in the trash anyway. Jessica carried the basket. She returned to the counter, and with a blood-chilling smile she lifted it in front of Emma's eyes. "You want bread?" she asked, in a falsely sweet voice. Emma nodded, with hope shining in her dirty little face. "You want me to give you all this bread?" Emma nodded again, faster. Mr. George felt something was wrong, very wrong. "Well, you're right," Jessica said. "This bread is no good for selling anymore. And you know where bread that's no good goes?" She took 3 steps to the right, toward where the trash can was. Big, black, with the lid open because they'd been using it all day. And then, while the entire bakery held its breath, while Mr. George felt the world stop, while Emma opened her eyes wide without understanding what was happening, Jessica dumped the entire basket. The bread fell into the trash can with dull sounds. Thump, thump, thump. Sweet buns, rolls, donuts, sweet breads. Everything fell among used napkins, empty coffee cups, the day's crumbs. But Jessica didn't stop there. She bent down. She grabbed a bottle of cleaning product from under the counter, and while looking directly into Mr. George's eyes, she sprayed all the bread. Pshh! The blue liquid fell on the breads, soaking them, destroying them, making sure nobody could rescue them later. "There you go," Jessica said, leaving the bottle on the counter with a sharp thud. "That's where leftovers belong. The trash. Where worthless things belong." And though she didn't say it in words, everyone understood the hidden message, where people like you belong. Mr. George couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Never in his 70 years of life had he felt such humiliation. He had gone hungry. He had slept on the street. He had been ignored, insulted, pushed. But never, never had anyone destroyed food in front of his eyes just to make sure he couldn't have it. And the worst of all, he heard a sound that tore his soul apart. Emma was crying. It wasn't loud crying, it was silent crying, the kind that hurts more. Her little body was shaking. Tears ran down her dirty cheeks, and her little hand squeezed her grandfather's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. Mr. George looked down, and he saw how his granddaughter, his treasure, his reason for continuing to live, looked at him with a broken question in her eyes. "Why are people mean, Grandpa?" He had no answer, because he was asking himself that same question. At that moment, Mr. George felt the world made no sense. That goodness didn't exist, that God had forgotten them. He was going to turn around. He was going to take his granddaughter's hand and leave there with what little dignity he had left. But then he heard a sound, a small sound but strong at the same time. Clank. It was the sound of a porcelain cup hitting a saucer. Hard. Everyone turned around, because that sound had come from the corner table, from the table by the window, where an elegant woman who had been sitting in silence all that time had just stood up. Mrs. Helen stood up slowly, with the elegance of someone who doesn't need to hurry because she knows she has all the power in the world. She left her purse on the chair. She smoothed her cream-colored suit, and she walked toward the counter. Her heels clicked on the ceramic floor. Click, click, click. Each step was firm, determined. Everyone watched her. Jessica also watched her, but not with fear. Not yet. She looked at her with that expression of, "Now what does this lady want?" as if she were just another annoying customer. Mrs. Helen reached the counter. She stopped right between Jessica and Mr. George, and with a calm voice, but one that cut like a knife, she said, "Jessica." The manager blinked. How did this woman know her name? "Yes, ma'am," she responded, with less certainty now. "Take that bread out of the trash," Mrs. Helen ordered, pointing at the garbage can. Jessica let out a nervous laugh. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I don't know who you think you are to—" "Do you know who I am?" Mrs. Helen interrupted her. and then something strange happened. The color drained from Jessica's face, as if she had suddenly remembered something, as if she had seen a ghost. Jessica swallowed hard. If you're enjoying this story of justice, if you want to know what will happen when Jessica discovers the truth, give me a like right now. Because what's coming will leave you speechless. Mrs. Helen reached into her purse. She pulled out something small, a card, a business card. She placed it on the counter, calmly, without hurry. Jessica looked at it, and when she read what it said on that card, all the blood drained from her face. Helen Morrison, President and Founder. Golden Delight. Franchise chain. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're... She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm the owner, Mrs. Helen said with deadly calm. I'm the owner of this franchise, and 27 others across the country. I'm the one who pays your salary, Jessica. I'm the one who gave you this job 2 years ago, and I'm the one who's about to decide if you still deserve to have it. Jessica's legs began to tremble. Mrs. Morrison, I didn't know. I never... Sit down, Helen ordered. Jessica obeyed immediately. She dropped into a chair behind the counter. Mrs. Helen turned to the 2 young employees who were watching everything with eyes like saucers. You two? What are your names? Maria, said one. Rosa, said the other. Maria, Rosa. I want you to take that bread out of the trash can, carefully. But ma'am, Maria dared to say, it's wet with cleaning product. You can't eat it anymore. I know, Helen responded. That's why you're going to throw it away. And then you're going to bring fresh bread, the bread you baked today, the best breads we have, from the expensive display case. Excuse me, Rosa wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. The best breads, the most expensive ones, bring them. Maria and Rosa looked at each other. Then they nodded and ran to fulfill the order. Mrs. Helen turned her gaze to Jessica. Now you and I are going to have a very important conversation, she said, and her voice sounded calm, but there was steel in it. And I don't want you to forget a single word of what I'm going to tell you. Jessica nodded, unable to speak. Her hands were trembling on her lap. Do you know why I opened these bakeries, Jessica? Helen asked. Jessica shook her head. I opened them 30 years ago. I was your age, 25 years old. And do you know what I was back then? Silence. I was a single mother with 2 young daughters. And I was so poor, so desperately poor, that there were days when I had to choose between eating myself or feeding my girls. Mr. George lifted his head upon hearing that. For the first time in many minutes, there was another emotion besides shame on his face. There was astonishment. Helen continued. One day, exactly 30 years ago, I walked into a bakery, similar to this one. I had some coins in my pocket, few, very few. I asked if they could sell me yesterday's bread. The owner looked at me with contempt. He told me that if I didn't have money, it wasn't his problem, and he closed the door in my face. A tear rolled down Helen's cheek, but her voice didn't tremble. That night, my daughters went to sleep hungry, and I cried. I cried so much I thought I would break. But the next day I got up, I worked, I saved, I studied, and I promised myself something. She leaned toward Jessica. I promised myself that if I ever had my own business, never but never would I treat another person the way that man treated me, and that if someone working for me did, they wouldn't deserve to work for me for another second. Jessica had tears running down her cheeks now. Mrs. Morrison, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't... Don't cry for yourself, Helen interrupted her harshly. Cry for them. She pointed to Mr. George and Emma. Cry for this girl who is 6 years old and hasn't eaten in an entire day. Cry for this grandfather, who gathered 50 cents of pure dignity to try to feed his family. Cry for all the people you, with your attitude of superiority, have humiliated in this place. Maria and Rosa returned with a new basket. This time it was full of freshly baked breads, sweet buns with shining sugar, warm rolls still giving off steam, glazed donuts, chocolate muffins, the best of the day. Helen took the basket. She turned to Mr. George. The old man looked at her without understanding. His tired eyes shone with contained tears. "Mr. Helen stopped. "What's your name, sir?" "George," he answered in a broken voice. "My name is George." "Mr. George," Helen said with genuine respect in her voice. "And your granddaughter?" "Emma," the girl whispered. Helen knelt down. She got on her knees in front of Emma, not caring that her expensive suit was touching the dirty floor. She was at the girl's eye level. "Emma," she said sweetly, "my name is Helen, and I want you to know something very important. Can you listen to me?" Emma nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her dirty little hand. "Never, but never, let anyone make you feel worthless. Understand? You're worth something. Your grandpa is worth something, and anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong." Emma swallowed hard. "Really?" she asked in a timid little voice. "Really," Helen promised. "And to prove it to you, today you and your grandpa aren't customers. Today you're my guests of honor." She stood up. She carried the basket to the nicest table in the place, the table by the window, her own table. "Sit here," she told them. Mr. George didn't move. He seemed to be in shock. But Mom, we're dirty. We're going to mess up your chairs." "Chairs can be cleaned, Mr. George," Helen responded firmly. "Human dignity cannot." She gently took him by the arm and guided him to the chair. Mr. George sat as if he were dreaming. Helen seated Emma in the chair next to him. Then she signaled to Maria. "Maria, bring them 2 hot chocolates, the best ones, and," she looked at the menu on the wall, "and 2 plates of the special breakfast, with eggs, beans, ham, fresh fruit, everything." "Right away, Mrs. Morrison." Helen placed the basket of bread in front of them. "Eat," she told them. "Eat everything you want. And when you finish, Maria will prepare another basket for you to take home." Emma looked at the breads, her little eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different tears, tears of gratitude. "Really?" she asked in her little voice. "Really, sweetheart." Emma took a sweet bun. She took a bite, and then, as only children know how to do, she smiled. A huge smile, with cheeks full of bread and sugar on her nose. Mr. George also took a roll, but before biting it, he looked at Helen. "Ma'am, I don't have any way to pay you." "You don't owe me anything, Mr. George." "Yes, I do. I owe you this." He pointed to his heart. "I owe you for giving me back my faith. I didn't believe there were good people left in this world." Helen felt a lump form in her throat. "Eat, Mr. George, please, and take good care of this girl. She's a treasure." "She's my only reason to live," he responded, and his voice was full of pure love. Helen turned to the counter. Jessica was still sitting in the chair with her face in her hands. "Stand up," Helen ordered. Jessica obeyed. Her makeup was smeared from the tears. "Mrs. Morrison, please, let me explain." "You don't need to explain anything. I saw everything you did. I saw how you treated an old man and a little girl. I saw how you destroyed food just to make sure they couldn't have it. And I saw something worse." "What?" Jessica asked in a trembling voice. "I saw that you enjoyed it. I saw that smile on your face when you dumped the basket." Jessica didn't know what to say, because it was true. "Jessica, you're good at your job. This location's numbers are good, but numbers aren't everything. A business without heart isn't a business. It's just emptiness with walls." Helen took a deep breath. "I'm going to give you one chance, just one, because I believe people can change. But listen to me well. If I find out again, if I hear through any means that you treated someone badly because of their appearance, their money, for any reason, I won't just fire you. I'll make sure you never work at any of my locations again." "Yes, Mrs. Morrison, yes, I promise you that—" "Don't promise me," Helen interrupted her. "Promise them." She pointed to Mr. George and Emma. Jessica turned to them. She walked slowly to their table. She stopped in front of Mr. George. The old man looked up at her, and then Jessica did something she never thought she would do. She knelt down. "Sir," she said in a broken voice, "I have no excuse. What I did to you and your granddaughter is unforgivable. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Mr. George looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, He extended his wrinkled, trembling hand, and he gave her gentle pats on the head, like you do with a child. "It's okay, daughter," he said in a tired voice. "It's okay." Jessica broke down crying. A loud cry. Real. Maria and Rosa were also crying as they prepared the food. Even some customers who were still in the place had wet eyes, because everyone had witnessed something rare in this world, real justice and genuine forgiveness. Helen observed everything from the counter. Then, satisfied, she took her purse. She was going to leave. Her work there was done, but before reaching the door she felt a tug on her suit. It was Emma. The girl had gotten down from the chair and had run to her. Now she was looking up at her with those big eyes. "Mrs. Helen," she said in her little voice. "Yes, my love? Are you an angel?" Helen laughed. It was a soft laugh, full of tenderness. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a person who remembers what it's like to go hungry. When I grow up," Emma said very seriously, "I'm going to be like you. I'm going to help people." Helen knelt down again. She took Emma's little hands between hers. "Then this world is going to be much better, sweetheart." She gave her a kiss on the forehead. She stood up and left the bakery. The tinkle of the doorbell sounded as it closed behind her. Inside, Mr. George and Emma ate until they were full. They ate warm bread with butter. They drank thick, hot chocolate. They tried the chocolate and vanilla sweet buns. They laughed when Emma got cream all over her nose. When they finished, Maria prepared 2 huge bags of food to take home: fresh bread, cookies, fruit, and even a thermos with hot soup. "For dinner," Maria told them with a smile. Mr. George couldn't believe they were carrying so much. He hadn't carried that much weight in food in years. When they went out to the street, the sun had already set. The city lights shone in the darkness. Emma was skipping. Her little belly wasn't making noises anymore. Now it was full, happy. "Grandpa," she said as they walked holding hands, "tomorrow are we going to have food?" Mr. George looked at the bags he was carrying. There was enough for 2 or 3 days. "Yes, my love. Tomorrow we're going to have food." "And the day after tomorrow?" Mr. George stopped. He knelt in front of her. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out. We always figure it out, right?" Emma nodded. "Because we have each other. Because we have each other," Mr. George repeated, and hugged her tight. In the distance, from her car parked on the corner, Mrs. Helen watched them. She saw the embrace. She saw how the girl clung to her grandfather. She saw the pure love that existed between them despite poverty, hunger, everything, and she made a decision. She took out her phone. She called someone. "Sandra, it's me, Helen. Listen, I need you to locate a man. His name is George. He's elderly, goes around with a 6-year-old granddaughter named Emma. They're around the downtown bakery area." Pause. "Yes, I want to offer him a job. Something in maintenance or cleaning at one of our locations. Something with good hours so he can take care of the girl. And I want you to investigate if the girl is in school. If not, I want to pay for her education." Another pause. "No, it's not charity. It's an investment. That girl promised that when she grows up she's going to help people, and I'm going to make sure she has the tools to keep that promise." Helen hung up. She looked one last time toward where Mr. George and Emma were walking away into the night. She smiled and started the car. At the bakery, Jessica stayed late, long after the customers left, long after Maria and Rosa finished their shift. She stayed cleaning, organizing, thinking about her life, about her choices, about how she had become so cruel. When she finally closed the store and went out to the street, she noticed something. On the corner where she had seen Mr. George and Emma waiting before entering, someone had left something. She approached. It was an old blanket and a cardboard sign with something written on it. She read the sign, "If you have extra food, leave it here. Someone needs it." Jessica didn't know who had put it there, but she felt something in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Shame, but also hope. Hope that she could still change. She went back into the bakery. She prepared a bag with fresh bread. She added cookies and juice. She went out and left the bag next to the sign. There was nobody nearby, but she knew someone would come, someone who needed it. And for the first time in a long time, Jessica smiled. not a smile of contempt, a real smile. That night, in different parts of the city, 3 people fell asleep thinking about the same thing. Mr. George, hugging his granddaughter in the shelter, with the bags of food stored under the bed, thanked God for putting angels in his path. Emma, with her little belly full for the first time in days, dreamed that when she grew up, she was going to have a bakery. And in her bakery, nobody was ever going to go hungry. And Mrs. Helen, in her elegant house, looked at photos of her now-adult daughters on the wall and remembered that night 30 years ago when she too had cried from hunger. She remembered that it was that pain that made her successful. But it was the memory of that pain that had kept her human, because success without humanity isn't success. It's just emptiness with money, and money can buy bread, but only love can share it. And you, who are listening to me right now, how many times have you passed by someone who needed help and looked the other way? How many times have you judged someone by their clothes, by their appearance, without knowing their story? The next time you see someone asking for help, remember Mr. George, remember Emma, remember that behind every person there's a story, and that sometimes what separates your life from theirs is just luck, because anyone can fall. But only those with heart help those who are on the ground. Be someone's angel today. Share your bread, share your time, share your humanity, because in the end, when this life is over and you look back, you're not going to remember how much money you made. You're going to remember how many people you helped. And that, my friend, that's the only thing that really matters. Before you go, leave me in the comments. Where are you watching from? Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, United States, Spain? Write your country in the comments. I want to know how far this story has reached. And if this story touched your heart, if you felt something real, give it a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that there are still good people in this world. Because stories like this need to be told, and people like you need to hear them. See you in the next video. God bless you. And remember, always share your bread.